Welcome to The Partial Historians.
We explore all the details of ancient Rome.
Everything from political scandals to love affairs, the battles waged, and when citizens turn against each other. I'm Dr. Rad.
And I'm Dr. G. We consider Rome as the Romans saw it, by reading different ancient authors and comparing their accounts.
Join us as we trace the journey of Rome from the founding of the city.
Hello and welcome to this special episode of The Partial Historians. I am Dr. G.
And I am Dr. Rad.
And we are super thrilled to be joined by a special guest today. Welcome, Neil.
Hello. Thanks very much for having me on and calling me special, which is something I haven't heard for years.
We meant it in a good way.
Oh, I'm sure it was, yeah.
So Neil holds a MA in Classics and History from Birkbeck, University of London, and is the founder of the popular Ancient Blogger website. And for the last 6 years, he has also been the host of the Ancient History Hound podcast. So Neil has experience in ancient Roman reenactment. And yes, he does own a suit of legionary armor. We're so glad you've already asked. And he also engages in school outreach programs, bringing the ancient Roman world to life for the next generation. And we're super thrilled to be sitting down and talking today about a little bit of topography when it comes to ancient Rome and thinking about exploring place and particularly going right back into the Regal period of ancient Rome to do it. So welcome, Neil.
Thank you. Yeah, just on that, yeah, it's great to be able to go out and sort of visit schools and do some volunteering work at schools wearing Roman armor. My back does not forgive me. It's great fun, and it does make a bit of difference because sometimes I think if you introduce history, ancient history, to new people in a different way, at whatever age, I think it disrupts some preconceptions. Because one of the questions I asked when I've had guests on my podcast, how did you get into ancient history? And for the most part, people tend to think, oh, I was translating Cicero at the age of 5 on my father's knee. The reality is, I think one of my guests, she said that it was because she watched The Mummy, and it can be stuff like that. So it's so important that people realize that it's sometimes the incidental actions and events in your life that can lead you to becoming really fascinated by a particular subject. And so it's good to be able to try and help with that. This is only my second time I think I've ever been on a podcast. The first time was right at the beginning. So I hope I'm a good guest anyway. So thanks again.
Well, we're predisposed to like you as two teachers. I think it's very admirable that you are volunteering your time in such a way.
Yes, I only hang out with children when they pay me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I got to be honest with you. I don't know how the teachers do it. I always say that to them, but I get bossed around by a bunch of kids for the best part of sort of 3 hours or so. I'm visiting a school in a couple of weeks, and I've got to do the invasion of Britain for a bunch of 9-year-olds, which is easy and difficult because there's some really interesting stuff there, but at the same time, it's quite difficult because you want to avoid the gruesome things. Which is fundamental to what the Roman army did. So it's talking about other areas and also trying to develop extension exercises and things that different kids will do. It's generally trying to spread the enjoyment of the subject. And that's something I've always tried to do through my podcast and everything else, is just trying to get people who haven't necessarily come across the topic interested in the topic, and they can feel that they can input. Because after all, ancient history is about people, and we sometimes forget that we have our base emotions, and they would have been exactly the same in antiquity. People got up in the morning, they got worried about their jobs, people had loves, they had breakups and everything else. And just finishing on that, there was an episode I did. I'm not going to keep plugging my episode, by the way, but when I went through the Oracle at Dodona, they found a bunch of lead sheets, and these were where people had written down their questions. And the questions, generally speaking, they came from all sections of society, including women, which is great because we don't have a great deal of that kind of information. But it was questions such as, should I get a new job? Should I change my career? Should I move? One of them was, should I have an affair? There was quite a lot of, who do I pray to make my kids better? But these were genuine questions that people have today. So again, it's about trying to tie in what was ancient to what is modern, and sort of shortening the distance between the two. So yeah, there we go. But anyway, we're talking about, as you said, about Rome, early Rome, and about the topography and how important the topography was, and some of the spaces and areas in that, and some of the discussions we can probably have that might throw a different perspective on things. So yep, looking forward to it. I've got my notes and I'll be doing lots of research, so fingers crossed.
Excellent. Well, we're pretty excited to explore this topic because, as you know, we wrote a book recently on the Roman kings, and we're really focused on the human character side of it. So very much like you were saying, engaging with school children and bringing that curiosity to the subject. It's the people factor that's really drives a lot of the work that we do as well. And so I think taking this different geographic angle is a really interesting way to think about the whole thing from a entirely different perspective. So one of the things that stands out when you think about Rome, and usually something that people tend to know about Roman geography, if they know anything at all, is that it's got 7 hills. This is apparently a very special number, gets bandied about a lot. But in the traditional foundation story, we have Romulus and Remus, and they start on different hills. And they're only 2 guys. One of them set up on the Palatine hill, and one of them set up on the Aventine hill. And I'm interested in what might be the significance of these 2 locations, and what could we know about them in this really early period, if anything at all.
Great start. Great place to start. Just before I go any further, I should say I bought your book, downloaded it onto my Kindle, and loved it. It was very, very good. So if anyone's listening out there,
Thank you.
This is not paid promo. This is a genuine review. I really enjoy it because it does that thing of engaging people. It's got some really interesting stories in there, and it's got some interesting questions as well, which I think you should always be able to take away from a book. Before I start on the whole 7 hills thing, I want to just cover a few basics about that, because people always think of hills and Rome, but not necessarily in the context of the causality and the importance of them. So to start with, having hills was generally a good idea, because hills mean hillside forts or hill forts, which means you've got a very good defensive position. That was a really popular thing at the time. The Etruscans were on it. You can pretty much go anywhere around the Mediterranean. People like high up places because they're easy to defend. You can stick a wall around them. You can stick the important buildings in there. Hey, presto, life is good. Where it becomes even more interesting and significant for Rome, or the area which became Rome, is the actual location of Rome, because Rome is at a fordable part of, or you could ford the River Tiber around Rome. Why is that important? Well, if you think of the Italian peninsula is quite narrow. It's around 180 kilometers, which is about 111 miles. I did a bit of working this out, and apparently that's the distance from Sydney to Mollybrook. And it's also the distance
wow,
from...
thank you for the local reference.
That's all right. Yeah, no, I looked it up, and I always like spending time on maps. And it's also, if you're in Chicago, that's the distance from Chicago to Lafayette. So it's quite narrow. And the problem or advantage that the Italian peninsula has is down the center of that, you've got the Apennine Mountains. So generally speaking, if you're traveling up and down Italy, you either do it on the eastern coast or you do it on the western coast. If you do it on the western coast, at some point you will have to pass and traverse, as it were, the Tiber River. So just to come back to it all, you've got a set of defensive positions right next to an incredibly strategic, important location on that side, on the western side of the Apennines. This is a great place. People sometimes ask, why did Rome develop? Well, it developed for a number of reasons, and it achieved what it did for a number of reasons. But these were all fundamentally underpinned by the fact of where it was. It had this great starting location. And if anyone's listening who has ever played Civilization, the computer game... I
was going to say, I was just having a Civ 6 moment in my mind.
This is the ideal start position. This is Riverside, Plains Hills. It's great. You've even, in theory, got some salt there nearby, which just makes, the ears will be pricking up for anyone who plays Civilization on any of the versions. It's just a great start position. So that was really important, and we'll come shortly to the whole issue of the Tiber and how that changed and shifted, because that's really important to understand with early Rome. So you've got these two hills. You've got the Aventine and the Palatine. So we start with the Palatine. The Palatine is very interesting in the way that it's handled, mythologically speaking, because it seems to have a prequel, because it's linked to a number of events that happened prior to Romulus and Remus, but it also stitches in nicely with certain points in their lives. It stitches in with sort of rites of passage, which I'll get to shortly. So what you have apparently, according to, I think it's both Dionysius of Halicarnassus and Livy, they both refer to Palentium. Palentium was a city or a small settlement or whatnot in Arcadia in central Greece. And it said that originally Evander and some other Greeks came over and they settled there. And I completely agree with the point that you made in your book. Dionysius of Halicarnassus sees Greeks everywhere. He just, to him, everything is
I
Greek.
see Greek people.
Yeah, totally. Everything is Greek. Yeah, they just did it with a different language a bit later on. And in Palentium, you have this initial settlement. Now, that ties into Palentium and Arcadia. Why is that interesting? It's interesting because Arcadia in the Peloponnese was an odd place, and it had some odd characters, even by the standards of Greek myth. One of them was King Lycaon. Now, people might have heard of him. King Lycaon was famous because he did that one thing that you should rarely, never, ever do, and that's try on with a god. He invites Zeus round for lunch, and to test if he's really that clever, he feeds him human flesh, which is just the more, I mean, if you think that's a bad idea, just remember that Zeus was, or Zeus Xenia, was an aspect of Zeus whereby he was the god of good guests and hosts. So incredible amount of importance was placed on being a good guest and a good host, presumably serving them human flesh. Bad idea. That somewhat sort of crosses the line a bit. And you're doing it with a god who is in charge of that particular element. Zeus does not take this well, as you might imagine, changes him into a wolf. Now, on Mount Lycaon, which is in Arcadia, you had an altar to Zeus, which was on a very long ash altar, and there were lots of things said about it. Without trying to go on a tangent, if you've ever listened to episodes on any podcast, I've done one myself on werewolves and werewolf myth, that is the point that you always arrive at, because people say, well, that's where you had some sort of wolf-based ritual. Now, tying that back in, why do you tie that in with Rome? Well, it's not necessarily just a tangent. It's because Rome obviously itself has some form of a wolf cult. It has a wolf association. And in fact, I think it's Livy again who says the Lupercalia, the festival where men would run around naked and hit people with goat hide thongs, originated from the Lupercal, the cave of the wolf on the Aventine. And in fact, there's the Lupercalia is a very interesting festival because it seems to be one that existed prior to Romulus and Remus. It probably had both of them grafted onto it. It has two functions. It seems to be a lustral rite, that is a purification rite, but it also has some sort of fertility basics to it. So it was one of these things that by the 1st century BC AD, people are trying to work out what it may have looked like. But the reality is, like many Roman things, including the Saturnalia, for example, it started out as something very different and ended up as something quite divorced or estranged from its origin, shall we say. And yeah, so you've got this right before Romulus and Remus rock up. When they do, that's where they end up as babies. They're washed up there in their basket, which was a bit of a trope in antiquity, and also speaks to the point of flooding in ancient Rome, which again is an important thing that we'll come to. It's also the place where they have their auguries. So you may have heard of the story where Remus goes to the Aventine and spots as many eagles as he can. Romulus does it on the Palatine. He spots more, he wins, he gets to found Rome. It's possibly the location as well of where Remus is killed. What is interesting is there are a number of different myths. Well, we have different versions for it. We have the version where it's just a straight out fight because the two brothers are just not going to get on, mainly because they're brothers, and that's what brothers tend to do, though probably not that extreme. but also because they're Romans, and Romans were very good at civil war. They were very good at infighting. And again, we have to remember that many of these myths are being created and worked on in a later period. So several centuries afterwards, we have Fabius Pictor at the end of the 3rd century BC, who's the first acknowledged Roman historian who's writing in Greek. And then you have Livy and Dionysius of Halicarnassus, who are writing centuries after that. So the reality is they're getting to a point where they're trying to work everything out retrospectively, and they're seeing what works for them in the modern world. Rome was a place of a lot of inattention, and we have a lot of civil wars. So of course it made sense that brothers would fall out, and perhaps that would lead to a very nasty end. So there's a fight there where Remus ends very badly for him. But there's also an element there of, and this is something I'd like to check in with either of you good selves, of the pomerium of this sacred boundary, because it's one of those things that sometimes it's a bit of an overreaction. Romulus killed his brother because he jumped over his wall and he mocked his foundations. Well, I've been round a relative's new conservatory. I wasn't that impressed. I was not that impressed with it, but they didn't murder me. And so why is that? Why did you have this extreme reaction? And I think the thing is we don't get the context. So foundations, particularly those associated with walls, had a sacred element to them. You didn't mock them. It would be the equivalent. I mean, there is no great equivalence, but perhaps it would be going to a cultural location where you just considered it as a physical presence. So, for example, going to Uluru and just going, that's just a sandstone feature, without realizing that is Uluru. That's much more than what it is. Perhaps, I was thinking of the Statue of Liberty. That's just a statue, but you don't get the cultural connotations there. The cultural connotations around that wall, around that area, was that it was incredibly important. And so by Remus mocking it and jumping over it, he was committing a real crime, which instigated that response from Romulus. In that context, it doesn't sound too bad. Again, extreme, but Romulus, as well as you well know, wasn't the most tempered of individuals. He often reacted.
Not a chill dude. Not a chill guy at all.
But bearing in mind how he'd grown up, I mean, his entire their existence and the myth prior to them, it's basically family members falling out and hurting each other in various ways. So again, this sits within this whole myth of, if you've got a relative, it's going to go Game of Thrones at some point. It's as simple as, it's just a case of when rather than if. And yeah, so we have that. There's also, and something I always go to, and I apologize for this because I got obsessed with human sacrifice after doing an episode on it. Not so much obsessed, actually. That might get the
that doesn't sound like a great way to phrase it.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah, I'd stop right there. Yeah.
yeah. I'm gonna say, yeah. Probably need to rephrase that. I found when I started looking and researching it, I saw it occurring more. Now, it occurs a lot in Greek myth, but they try and tidy it up. Great example is Iphigenia, who's stolen away by Artemis when she's said to be sacrificed. And that was the idea of substitute sacrifice. So, the Greeks do a kind of a good job of tidying up, though occasionally they leave it right in the open and just move on, such as Achilles in the Iliad, where he gets rid of the Trojan princes, and where Achilles is involved in the sacrifice of Iphigenia at the beginning, and where Achilles is involved in the sacrifice of Polyxena at the end of the Trojan War. So Achilles, he wasn't particularly nice, or he had that element to him. But there is something of an argument to talk about how Remus dying is almost an essential requirement. Now, you can move that out into a conversation about how sometimes when cities were established, large settlements, there's an argument that someone was ceremonially sacrificed to ensure the health of it, particularly around walls, particularly around those liminal spaces. But I don't want to get into that too much because I'm not entirely comfortable with the research on that. I'm not that well acquainted to it. But when you look at the myth, and obviously this is where I move fully within the realm of your respective expertise on this, the founding of the Republic, well, that was bloodshed. That was that you have the death of Lucretia. You also have the death of Brutus's sons. You have these sort of repeated actions of, if you're going to found something big, if you're going to have this big setup, it requires a great cost. And that great cost can often be an individual being killed or being moved on, as it were. So I think that's an important thing to notice about the Palatine. But there's also a good one, Plutarch. Plutarch gives a more sort of amusing and I wouldn't say he's throwing a bit of shade, but Remus gets annoyed at Romulus because he thinks he's cheated.
I love that version of the story. That's my favorite one.
Yeah. And a fair guess, I would say.
I think it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange competition. It's like me going, right, that we're going to win a car. The three of us are going to win a car. You just got to think of the highest number, but we'll say it in order, and I get to go last. I'm not saying one. I'm just going to say the highest. Yeah. So we do. And it's also interesting. It's vultures. Often we have associations of eagle with ancient Rome, particularly with Tarquin when he gets his cap snatched by an eagle. But these were vultures, which again people may not know that much. A bit of trivia, impress your friends, astound your relatives. So we have that. So that's where we come to the Palatines. It was obviously pretty much where Rome is founded, and it becomes an incredibly important location. Before I go to the Aventine, have I missed anything on that, do you think? Or is there anything?
No, I don't think so. I think there's something quite interesting about the idea of the blood sacrifice as a necessity in terms of like establishing a sacral border and what that means for other rituals that the Romans then participate in later on, for sure. And I think this extended narrative that has a way of connecting Rome back to Greece is something that Greeks across the ancient world would be very keen about, for sure.
Yeah, it's very difficult to really understand Rome without considering it for the filter of Greece. And the Mediterranean was a real cultural melting pot. People were constantly exchanging ideas, cultures. You had Greeks in the south of Italy and Magna Graecia. You had the Etruscans, who were heavily influential in Rome, big Greek fans. In fact, I guarantee, if you're listening to this and you have a favorite Greek vase, the chances are it was found in an Etruscan tomb. That's why it survived.
They did love that stuff. It's everywhere there.
Yeah. When I first started studying it, studying all those years ago, I couldn't get my head around it. I'm like, but this is a Gnatic vase, but it was found. What the heck was how did that work? And obviously there's cultural transmission, but the stuff in Athens didn't necessarily survive as much. Or rather, if you're looking for an object to survive, it needs to be in a tomb or somewhere away from everyone for a long time, and hopefully dodge tomb robbers, and hopefully gets excavated and it's still there in one piece. So the other thing about the Palatine is when you're looking at the topography of Rome, it's quite important to understand where all the hills were. Now I'm going to do a really basic thought experiment here, which is either going to fail or do well. I can see the looks on your faces. So when you think of the hills of Rome, the way that I try and do it is a clock face. And sort of, if you think at 12 o'clock and going up north, you've got the Field of Mars, that kind of thing. In the center of clock face, you've got the Tiber, which winds round from around 11 o'clock, disappears around 7 o'clock, and it intersects with the Forum Bararium, that's the main crossing point into Rome. At 9 o'clock, you've got the Janiculum Hill. At 6 o'clock, you've got the Aventine. And then you've kind of got the Palatine just to the center, just to the right, sort of 3 o'clock-ish, if you think of it like that. So if you're on the Palatine Hill strategically is really important because you're right dead center of that crossing. So again, it is one of the most important hills. I mean, the Capitoline Hill's close as well, so is the Aventine Hill. They're not, and the Janiculum, these are not far from that crossing. But if you were going to choose one first, you'd probably choose the Palatine Hill as being that initial place that you'd want to be. So again, we need to tie this in, the myths into the sort of pragmatism of it all. Now, I'm going to move to the Aventine. The Aventine Hill is interesting mainly because it has an association with, and I never say this name right, so feel free to laugh, with Cacus, the giant who Hercules fights, and it's associated with him because, again, you have a Hercules at Rome quite early on, or certainly prior to Romulus and Remus. It also became a bit of a staging post. It became an emptying. This is where people settle. The Latins who were defeated under Ancus, the fourth Roman king, always get them mixed up. He settles them there because he can't settle them anywhere else. So it's sort of a bit of a staging post, overspill. That's where people are going to go and live. But the weirdest thing that I found out about this, it was something I hadn't realized. And again, I'm going to defer to your expertise on this. Until the reign of Claudius in the 1st century AD, it was outside of the city's pomerium. This was not inside this. It was there's discussion. It might have been enclosed by walls, but it wasn't inside the pomerium. And could you just for a moment just give an, because I've tried to find good definitions of what the pomerium was, but are you able to just distill that if you can? If that's
so the
okay.
pomerium is, because it's the sacral boundary, it is marked out physically in certain ways, but it is not something that is a physical barrier as such. So there's marker points for it. We understand it through archaeological evidence. And in order to shift it becomes a huge deal, because that would be expanding the sacral boundaries of the city. So that has to be a very deliberate choice. The Romans are fundamentally a highly religious and God-fearing people. So they don't make decisions without consulting the gods on any level. It doesn't really matter what it is, whether it's in your home, whether it's in public, whether it's going to war, the gods have to approve. They need to feel that sense that their relationship is right with the gods. And so the pomerium is both an indication of what is inclusively believed to be part of sacral Rome versus what is considered to be foreign and outside. So in the worst case scenario, it's not the physical walls of Rome that ultimately need to be upheld and defended, although they're very important, but it's making sure that that sacral boundary is never violated. So having the Aventine outside of that for a very long time is conducive to the sorts of things that you're saying in terms of people coming into Rome when they're slightly foreign and they're considered to be migrant populations. They settle in the Aventine because they're allowed to be there, and they're allowed to worship their own gods there without any problems. As soon as they cross that sacral boundary, it becomes an issue. You can't have foreign gods inside the pomerium. So everything to do with a multicultural life, which Rome increasingly becomes known for, is going to be happening at those bleeding edges around the outside of the pomerium. And so having the Aventine outside of that for a long time, super useful, and will become super useful for the struggle of the orders. And I'm using my flesh rabbits.
I was going to say, I remember thinking about this when we were talking about the second secession, the Aventine as a place in that particular narrative where the plebeians are like, you know what, screw you guys, we're not going to be part of this thing anymore, became important.
We're just going to leave this whole town.
We're just going to leave and we're going to go to the Aventine. Yeah.
Yeah, this is not Rome anymore. The Aventine is its own place. Thank you very much.
Yep, it's its own thing. It's got different vibes, guys.
I live in Brighton, and there's a bit of a thing with Brighton because it's alongside Hove. And I don't know if you might have heard of this, but there's a sort of thing where people, whenever they say, "Oh, you live in Brighton," people would always say, "No, actually, Hove actually." And Hove actually became its own little thing. It got printed on T-shirts. And I didn't grow up in Brighton, so I'm not aware of it or that much. But when I first started to talk to people, I was like, "Where do you live?" Well, I live in Brighton, but I actually live in Hove. But I'm not saying that to be that person who's actually Hove, that sort of thing. So I don't know. We should get Aventine actually T-shirts. There we go. That could be.
Yeah, probably.
The idea of it, and I did a bit of obviously digging to work out why this might be. So why wasn't it included? And the general consensus in the sources seems to be no one actually knew, but they had some ideas. And there was a sort of historian who wrote called Aulus Gellius, who wrote Attic Nights, which sounds like something you'd find on Netflix and not know if you'd watch it in front of your parents. I don't know. It's a bit like, not quite sure about this one. And he said he wasn't sure. He said there are a number of reasons. However, he quoted Messala, who was a consul back in 53 BC. And apparently, according to Messala, he said that it was because of ill-omened birds at the point of when that augury was taken.
Right from the beginning, Remus was wrong.
Yeah, it was a bad one. And the whole hill that he did, and somehow that had some association with it. But there is probably a more practical reason for this. And for this, I need to go back to that clock face I did earlier. So as you remember, you've got the Field of Mars around 12 o'clock, and then you've got around 9 o'clock, you've got the Tiber, and then you've got the Aventine at around sort of 6 o'clock. Now, when it came to moving troops around, the Field of Mars was where you marshalled troops early on in Rome. At that point, Rome was obviously conducting military activities in a number of locations, but a lot to the south. If you take your soldiers from that point south, you face a big problem, because if you have to cross the Pomerium, as I understand it, and again, this is something I'm not entirely aware of, you've got to do a bunch of sacrifices and general rituals to cross over the Pomerium. So it's a bit like when, I suppose, in some cities where you have a zone where you can't, drive between these certain hours or whatnot, or your car needs to be this type of setup, or perhaps it's just pedestrianized. So you'd be crossing it twice, and that could really forestall an army because it could take time. However, if the Aventine wasn't in the Pomerium, then you can kind of take your men down the side of the eastern bank of the Tiber, and they don't have to worry about that. And they don't want to go the other routes, because the two other routes from the Field of Mars, if there was a Pomerium immediately to the south, would mean, well, you've got to cross the Tiber. Well, you can't cross the Tiber south. You've got to go all the way north and finding a decent crossing point. If you want to go east, you've got to loop north and east around the hills. That when you're moving a larger number of individuals, and again, the logistics of the Roman army is always an interesting thing, perhaps more so than what they actually did on the battlefield, though I never said that. You move the slowest thing in your army is the fastest you move. And often this is oxen. Oxen don't sprint. They don't move very quick. So you could lose a good day or two just making that progression, or albeit if you have to cross the Pomerium. If the Pomerium isn't to the south, you've got easy dibs going. It's much easier to move troops. So why does Claudius do it? Well, apparently Claudius does it for a couple of reasons. Primarily because he's so amazing and he's expanded the empire. Also, it doesn't really matter. No one apparently really was that bothered by it, because Rome at that time, if you're an army, you weren't stationed at Rome. You weren't stationed really near Rome. You were stationed on the borders. So it didn't really have that same impact in terms of army. And I think it's one of those things he has is his big thing that he does, or a big thing, and everyone's like, yeah, cheers, thanks for that. Yeah.
Woo!
New area code, yay!
Yeah, a really sad kind of, a sad pop where everything goes up in the background, and it's kind of just, yeah, thanks for that. So yeah, so that's primarily the two hills, or rather, that's the Aventine and the Palatine. And it's interesting to see how, I wouldn't say they necessarily take on the characteristics of their forebearers, as it were, but there is something there to them. One is associated with everything about Rome and how great it was. The other one is, yeah, well, he's a bit weird. It's a sort of, the black sheep of the Roman hills.
I like that idea. So this is actually a good segue for us, because we were going to ask you a bit about something to do with Romulus and to do potentially with troops and that sort of thing. So as you know, Romulus seems to come to a sticky end on the Campus Martius. So let's think about how the Romans might have understood Romulus's connection to this place and his legacy later on. Because as you've already hinted at, the Romans are kind of trying to sometimes fit pieces together retrospectively.
Yeah, it's really difficult as well, I think. This is why I find the story of the kings, or the regal period, so fascinating, because it's a big disaster movie. That's what it is. It does. It's not going to end well. You know what's going to happen. They're not getting off the plane. That's what's going to happen. It's just, how are they not going to get off the plane? And sorry if that sounded tasteless, by the way, but if you're going to put it within the context of modern day disaster movies, it's that kind of thing. This doesn't end well, and it's weird because you have this internal tension in the narrative of, isn't Rome fantastic? Wasn't it founded? By the way, it's amazing, but also it's not very good because it ends really badly, because the thing that starts it all is ultimately a very bad thing come the seventh king. I mean, even if you make a good case for sort of Servius, the sixth king, he does things, but he still acts in a sort of pseudo dictator fashion at points, because he does cheat the system. He doesn't have the proper elections and the interregnum and whatnot. It's just because everyone likes him that it's okay. So if you look at it from the process is pretty broken by that point in terms of how you elect a monarch and what the monarch should be doing. And the idea of supreme power and how it's wielded becomes an issue then. It's just that when it's with the bad guys, and particularly the seventh king, it's more obvious because we're automatically not liking him. But it's one of those things that if your friend's doing something that isn't morally good, you can be a bit more forgiving. But obviously, if it's somebody you don't like doing it, well, then you're going to be entirely damning. And I think that's what we have here. So it's interesting with the narrative of how we move across with Romulus. And then you mentioned the Field of Mars. I find it, and again, it's laugh out loud funny when you hear of the story of how he goes missing in the Field of Mars, or alternatively is hacked to pieces, depending on which you think's more likely, given that it's Rome. Oh yeah, Rome, where you never have political violence, where it's always everyone's really happy with each other. And then afterwards you have that senator appearing and telling the masses who are a bit worried about it, don't worry, the ghost of Romulus appeared to me, just me, no one else, and told me, don't worry everyone, it's all good, life is good, don't kick up a fuss, I've gone now, be happy. And that's it. But in terms of the actual location itself, nothing much happens to the Field of Mars in terms of it being developed until the late Republican period, simply because it's this big marshy land. It's got lots of mosquitoes, very difficult to train, and it's also useful. It's a useful kind of area where no one really knows what to do with it, because you can have horse riding events there. They have a festival called the October Horse, which comes in later, I think. I don't think we can really date it to this period, but that's linked to sort of horse races, and it doesn't end too well to the winning horse, I should add, so I won't go much further than that. But in either case, it's a space that I think you said about how the Pomerium was important. This was outside, so you can kind of anything goes there. You can get up to stuff.
Ooh, you can get away with hacking someone to death.
Yeah.
In theory, allegedly, though he went up to heavens in a storm, because that's what you do. And I also found it interesting because I think there, and I haven't been able to get into this, but that's where you had the theatre of Pompey, which is where Caesar met his end. So I think, again, if someone's listening to this and they're tutting, I apologise. I didn't get a chance to look into this too much, but I know obviously Caesar was assassinated in the Pompey's theatre, and I think that's where Pompey's theatre was based. So if so, you have two distinct events in Roman's history where a person in charge meets a rather unfortunate end, both in the Field of Mars. And it's also the only other thing that I can think of that, or found within the Regal period, is it seems to have been the property of the seventh queen, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, or Superbus. I always say Superbus because it's got a cape on, so it doesn't matter.
Superbus, I believe, is how the Latin would take it. But
he's always Superbus to us.
We put a cape on him; he's fine. That's apparently that was his land, and when again, according I think it's Livy says that after he was dealt with, they took it back and dedicated it to Mars. So exactly what he was likely to do with that, but again, perhaps that was his land. Perhaps it had something to do with the army. Perhaps it had something to do with controlling. It's not an area Rome really needs to develop at that point. Certainly within the Regal period, they've got more important places, which we'll speak about in a moment. Yeah, so that's the I think the Campus Martius, or as much as I've got anyway to talk about it.
I mean, it's an interesting place because it does have this famous sort of idea about it as this sort of area where people get together, and it's where a lot of voting happens later on and things like that, precisely because it's outside the Pomerium. But yeah, it's interesting that for the Romans, this idea that people could potentially be murdered there doesn't necessarily mean that it changes the way that you engage with the space. And perhaps we shouldn't be surprised by something like that. I mean, that's true in the modern world as well, as horrifying as that is. If somebody is murdered in their home, for instance, it's not like the property will stand empty for all time. Eventually, somebody will buy it and it will be used again. So keeping on this sort of topic of violence for a moment, I think it's the Romans. It's not us, that's for sure. There is also the Tarpeian Rock, which is this sort of infamous ledge that juts out from the Palatine, and you can still kind of make it out today. You certainly wouldn't want to be pushed off the top of it. It would definitely hurt. But we're interested in how it comes to have that name. And this might be a bit of a Dorothy Dixer question because I love the Tarpeian Rock. But also, why does it become so infamous?
So you've just done that thing of asking me a question on a subject you're an expert in, and I'm going to fail horribly now. I am going to fall from that ledge.
You're not.
Not at all.
Okay.
If you get close, we'll catch you. Don't worry.
Yeah, we also wrote that book a while ago, so the details are getting fuzzy.
Just gesture at me wildly. No one can see. Yeah, so when we got the Tarpeian Rocks, I think the Capitoline, as I think it's as a ledge that's it's on the Capitoline, which is interesting because where it's located is also near a couple of other places that we'll talk about, which are also to do with imprisonment or disposal, as it were. The story goes back, and the story is when you talk about stories in ancient Rome, and you say that doesn't really add up, there are plot holes. The story of Tarpeia is one of the more bizarre ones because it really doesn't add up. So the story goes that you've got the Sabines who've taken the Capitoline Hill and they've taken the Citadel. This is a really important defensive position. There's lots of problems, and they've done so by it being betrayed to the Sabines. And the person who does that is Tarpeia. It depends which version of the myth you read, but she's either the daughter of the main man or who's in charge there, or I think in some instances she's been referred to as a Vestal. I think that might be another version of it. And she basically says that she likes what the Sabines have on their left arms, which are bracelets, golden bracelets. If you give me some of those, I'll let you in. And so it happens. But she is then crushed by the shields because it's Titus Tatius at the time. He's got the second best name in the Regal Rome after Metius Fefetius, who should be in the cast of Cats. I don't know why, but when you read a name, something pops up. I visioned him as someone from Cats. So yeah, Titus Tatius, and he ends up treats her as a traitor because she has sort of betrayed it. She doesn't want to pay her. It also could be because he's not going to give her the golden arm bracelets. And she then gets sort of crushed by shields, and then that location takes its name from her being a traitor, and that's where people who betray the Roman state and do very, very, very bad things are hurled from it. What's quite bizarre about this story, even within the context, is that there's actually a version which I think Dionysius of Halicarnassus talks about, Lucius Piso, and he says actually they got it wrong. Because what she was trying to do was disarm the Sabines. So she was kind of she was acting as double agent. I'll let you in, but you just drop the shields. Leave the shields and I'll let you in. And then she would have presumably then told her father, whoever they were in command, and they would have been able to take out the Sabines easily. But it's just a very odd myth by mythic standards because there's so much internal tension. And there is a history of this sort of thing, in terms of people giving away, unfortunately, betraying, as it were, and being punished for betrayal. There was an individual, I forget their name, who had betrayed a city to Achilles, and she was killed. She was stoned to death because it's a case of, well, you betrayed to me, so I can't trust you. So there are these sort of, it belongs, I think, to a wider morality tale of betrayal never ends well, as opposed to anything else. But I think it's also links to an important point that you make in the book about how women are used, or women appear at really, really important moments within the regal history to make a statement about something, or they're used to make a statement.
Moments of crisis, yes.
It can't be a man wouldn't betray them. And it had to be a woman who'd betray. And why would a woman betray them? Because of shiny things. And you look at that and you're just thinking, my gosh, that's...
Thanks, Rome. Really? Thanks for establishing the patriarchy in such a visceral way for us all.
It's a real vote of confidence, yeah.
Even people from 1970s British TV would look at that and go, well, that's a bit harsh. We can't do that. That's too much for us. So we've got the misunderstood heroine aspect, which I think is an important thing. We've also got this concept of bloodless execution. Now, one of the things that is important, both at Rome and more so, I think, at Greece, that's probably reflects more my study of it, is the concept of pollution, miasma. The idea was that if you murdered someone, you were both polluted by the acts, and this act could even extend to the objects themselves. In Athens, there was actually a law court that would prosecute objects used in murder, and there were elsewhere. There's a story of I believe it's in Thasos, an island, where there was a statue of a famous athlete, and it was a bronze statue, and every night this guy turned up who hated this person and hit it with sticks, and one day it falls on him and kills him.
Serves him right. Stop hitting it with sticks, man.
I did get that sort of, again, I don't know if people have got, this might be a very niche reference, but Basil Fawlty hitting the mini with the branches. It's that kind of a thing. And they took the statue, then got prosecuted by the deceased brother, and it got thrown into the sea.
Oh.
And we know about this because afterwards they started suffering from various problems, harvest problems. And the Oracle at Delphi said, well, that's because you need to recall all the exiles. And they recalled all the exiles, but it still kept happening. And then they said, well, it's actually the athlete. You need to bring the athlete back. So they had to get fishing nets, go and find the statue and bring it back and stick it back in its place. The point is that certain acts were both manifested pollution at Rome, not just, and when we think of pollution, we think of it in the modern context. You think of fumes, you think of bloodstains, things like that, but it could be the act itself. And having a Tarpeian rock, if someone's thrown from it, no one's actually killing you, which sounds weird because obviously, if I was to push someone off a cliff, I'd be convicted of murder. But the way it was seen slightly differently, it wasn't like you were sticking a sword in someone's head or doing it in a more up close and personal manner. And it's also extended to how the Romans would sometimes deal with the defeated enemies they'd bring in. They'd strangle them. So a lot of the execution, and what's strange in all of this is then you have the sort of the gladiators, you have the Colosseum, and you have before it the Circus Maximus or other locations where bloodshed is absolutely required, but it's a very different context there. It's a very different space. So you've got this strange thing, and I've got a question about Pomerium for you, because technically, are you above the Pomerium if you're being pushed from a rock? So does this act still occur within? And that's a thought exercise more than anything else, because there was one paper I read, and it suggested that you have these two spaces in Rome where people are disposed of, or could be disposed of. One of them is a Tarpeian rock. The other one is later becomes the Carcer or Tullianum, which we'll speak about. And in the one that's underground, people could be strangled. In the one that's above ground, people were thrown from it. So again, how does that interact with the Pomerium? Because it's not happening on the ground. Is it still affecting it or interacting with it in some way? I'm not going to necessarily expecting an answer on that. It was one of those things that came up, and I thought, can I just throw them that one? They'll probably hate me for it, but.
Look, I think this ties into Dr. G's interest in the sense of the way that Vestals are disposed of when they've been thought.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry. That was the best example. Why didn't I think of that? Sorry.
No, don't be silly. No, I was just saying, yeah, I think it's very much in Dr. G's realm of interest. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it is a really interesting question. And it is one that I would want to think about more as well, because there is that sense in which the Romans do like creating scenarios where they can say that the gods kind of made the decision about that person's outcome rather than themselves. And if you manage to convince somebody, either when you're prodding them at a spear point or whatever, to jump off that rock, that's now in the gods' hands. And that would be then considered a naturally occurring death rather than one in which life has been taken by another human and therefore the pollution doesn't happen. Strangulation, I think, would be a more challenging one to get the vibe right for in terms of the moral justification. So I'm intrigued by that, because certainly as a parallel to that, the situation with the Vestal Virgins was that the burial spot was always outside the Pomerium. Just outside. So like right on that edge spot.
Okay.
And by having that underground chamber and providing a little bit of food and beverage and then locking those women in, they could reasonably and morally claim that no person in Rome had killed that woman. The gods had decided that she had to die.
And they, in theory as well, I suppose you've got that, well, if the gods really liked her, they'd have come and saved her.
Well, exactly. She would have gotten out of there and presumably run away from the city and not come back. So did any survive? We don't know.
Yeah. There is a philosophical exercise or an exercise that was done in rhetoric, apparently relating to this. So you have Quintilian, apparently, who talks about what happens if someone survives the fall. And the argument is, do you take them back up and ask for them and ask them, do you mind? Do you take them back up and redo it again?
Yeah, could you quite possibly? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, how awkward for us. This is really embarrassing from us. So can you help us out here?
Yeah.
and this also, these types of sort of, I don't know if there's an necessary answer to that. I think it was just one of those sort of rhetorical discussions that you had as part of training, because another one that was similar to this was that tyrants were forbidden to be buried in the city. But if you were struck by lightning, apparently you had to be buried wherever you were struck by lightning. So if a tyrant was struck by lightning in the Forum, they would have to be buried in the Forum, or don't you? And again, it's one of those, there's probably not a right answer. It's just a sort of how you would argue and how you don't argue in encounters and stuff like that. So it's, yeah, again, there's the other thing about the Tarpeian is that apparently that's what the hill was called before it was called the Capitoline. Yeah, and it was only changed. I love this. They changed the name because they found a head when they were digging for the temple, the foundation of the temple.
Damn straight they did.
Yeah, that head's pretty important. I think we need to change the name of this place.
Yeah.
Awkward.
Exactly. It's a sign that Rome was meant to be the dominant place in the whole world.
I like the idea that it was found by someone. They're like, oh, I found this head. Yeah, that looks like the guy you had an argument with in the pub last night. Might be, no idea. I think what we do, this has obviously come from the gods. We obviously need to change the name of the hill. Doesn't look like anything like that guy I had an argument with the public last night. No.
It's clearly a symbol of our domination.
Yeah. So yeah, that's, I mean, I think I've covered some of the aspects to it, but it's just the way it looks now, I understand, is very different because, again, something that should be said is if you're walking around Rome now, you're walking around an incredibly different Rome, even to the point of going back to, say, the 1st century AD. I think the current archaeological level is around 10 meters below the current level. In most, obviously, in some places it won't be, but in other places it will be. And in fact, when we want to come to talk about the Tiber, even the Tiber itself is in a very different place to when it was, and this changed throughout the Republican period as well, which is a point again that I'll come to. I got obsessed by the Tiber River after a while. I read so many reports and geological surveys and gosh knows what.
Well, you've given me a perfect segue here because the next thing we wanted to ask you about were bridges. So Rome's second king, Numa, is generally given the credit for building the first permanent bridge over the Tiber, known as the Pons Sublicius. Now, obviously, there are practical reasons that one would build a bridge over a river. However, this particular one also seems to have had very significant religious connotations for the Romans. So how was the Pons Sublicius entwined with Roman ritual practices in this early period?
Thank you. Right. Yeah, I got obsessed by the Pons Sublicius when I was reading up and doing my research on it. To talk about the bridge, you have to talk about the river. To talk about the River Tiber, you've got to make a couple of points about it. The first is the River Tiber now is in a very different course to where it was even in archaic Rome. So in archaic Rome, the likelihood was that it was around 100 meters where it bends round and comes into the Forum Boarium, that area. It was 100 meters further to the east. So if you were, I think the Via Petrocelli, that was pretty much the riverbank of the time, if you look on a modern map. If you stood by the bank now, you'd be underwater. That's important for a number of reasons. Firstly, the Tiber was wider, therefore slower. The Tiber, the course of the Tiber changes, and it changes for a number of reasons. It changes because of human activity. It changes because of natural mechanics, such as siltation. There's also other things apparently that are going on. It's to do with tectonic features and whatnot and everything else. Far too complicated for my shallow mind, pun intended, when it comes to that kind of thing. So that explains one practical, because I want to talk about the practical aspect of the bridge first, because it's famous because it's a wooden bridge built without iron. And it takes its name, Sublicius, apparently from piles, which are what it's built on. Now, anyone who lives near a river will realize that bridges are very dangerous if the river starts misbehaving. If you've got a permanent bridge, a stone bridge, that can really cause problems if the river's changing. If the river's changing course, if it's widening, if it's shortening, if it's flooding, it can cause you, some serious problems. And it's not until the 2nd century BC that you have the Pons Aemilius, which is the first stone bridge, possibly reconstructed from a wooden one. If you've got this little wooden bridge and it's on piles and it's mobile, you can do a lot with it. You can make it longer, you can make it shorter. If you think you can raise it, it gives you much more mobility, which is essential when you've got the Tiber, which is changing. The Tiber seems to narrow at this point. So when you have a narrowing river, as a general rule, said with my geography GCSE hat on, it gets faster, it gets deeper, so it becomes more dangerous. And that's why we have the bridge in its form. And again, I can't overestimate just how much this does change. For example, the Tiber Island builds up apparently due to siltation in this period. So it's not that. And I did read one account or one myth. I don't know if this links in necessarily because I'm not sure if it was this they were speaking about. But the myth related to the Field of Mars and apparently some wheat was grown there. Because it was sacred to the god Mars, they couldn't eat it or do anything with it. So they say, we'll throw it in the river. They throw it in the river, and it's so coarse and big that it built up over time, and that's how you get the Tiber River, the Tiber Islands. So I think that's one explanation that the Romans had. But in any case, even and this is really important, even if you were living in the time, if you lived for 300 years from the Regal period onwards, you'd have seen the Tiber move massively. So something that I try and get across to people, and is very difficult because I always fall to it, is we think of ancient history as monolithic. So the people in 500 BC are the same as the ones in 1st century AD. Got the same taste, same technology. They're all ancient. Whereas the reality is, even in sort of between centuries, you've got big changes going on. You've got big change in attitude. When Marshall has his epigrams, he does a list of the gifts in the Saturnalia. In those, he includes ancient vases. So what's an ancient vase? Well, yeah, because if something's 300 years old, 400 years old, it's going to be ancient. We don't have this one advantage for looking, or one privilege looking now backwards and going, everything before, the year dot or the year zero, as it were, was ancient and it belonged to the same thing. People within that period considered time as we do. In the same way that we might look back and go, the Industrial Revolution, that was a long time ago. People in Republican Rome were looking back and going, Romulus, a long time ago. Or in theory anyway, if we knew what they were thinking, because bearing in mind that myth doesn't start coming around until later on. Anyway, I'll get back to the bridge. So you have the bridge, which, as I said, is built wooden, and I've got a question for your good selves on this. And this is where it links in, because we have Numa as linked into the bridge, because he was said to have brought in the pontifex or the pontifesses. Pontify, I'm not pontifesses. It doesn't sound right. It's probably the way you say it. I've done it. It's pontifices. I'm so going to mispronounce that and make it a swear word. So I'll just say priests. I'm just going to say priests from now on. Yeah. So you have the priests that are associated with the bridge and the repair. And Plutarch speaks about this, but he says, I don't believe it. Everyone else does. But I have a thought, and it's not going to be an original thought. It's like many thoughts I have. I think they're really, really good, and then I Google them. It turns out someone wrote a book about it in the 1920s. But at this time, you have Rome really, really creating ritual associated to so many things. And one of the things is warfare. You have the doors of the temple, I think it's Janus, which are opened, closed, depending on when Rome's at war. You have the fetiales, the priests that you have to declare war in a ritualized way. And Livy and Dionysius Halicarnassus both tell us that this bridge was removed in times of war, primarily for practical reasons. It made sense because that's the front door to Rome. They're not going to cross. If you leave the drawbridge down, problems are going to happen. So if you think about the declaration of war, and then you've got to move an object, and they're shutting doors and they're dancing to declare war, why wouldn't that be as part of some sort of religious ritual? I mean, again, I'm asking the both of you if you've probably read books on this already, so it's not a new thing. But could it be that declaration of war and the movement of the bridge was a religious, or brought into the religious sphere?
Yeah, I think so. And look, you're not alone. It is, I think, the bane of every researcher of the ancient world to come to the sad realization that a German scholar in the 19th century has gazumped you, and really you're playing a tough game of catch up. But yeah, certainly this idea of the bridge as being one in the caretakership of pontifices. So already there is a ritualized aspect to it. It's something under their purview. They need to think about it. And the idea that a waterway wouldn't have huge symbolic and ritual significance in any case, I think would be misplaced. There's nothing quite as fundamental to ensuring that urban life is successful than making sure that you've tended to the river and you look after it and it's part of the care and concern. And so having rituals develop around this kind of thing is super important and useful. Water is a cleansing agent. In many respects, it's one of the ways that you shift pollution away from the sort of the urban area. So it's not a great idea necessarily to put heaps of stuff into your river, but if you need to, it moves, and that's great. It's probably the fastest way to get it away. And in that sense, having something that traverses that space allows you to open up one powerful opportunity ahead of you on the other side. But also, as you say, that's that really profound sense of the defensive quality that comes with a waterway and what a bridge does to sort of counteract that. So I think there is ways in which having rituals built up around a wooden bridge that you can shift and move and perhaps adapt to the situation, super useful and important. And yeah, there's certainly no way that I can think of that wouldn't be a religious thing from the Rome's perspective, a Roman perspective. They see gods in water, they see gods on land, they see gods in the sky. It's all happening everywhere all the time.
Thanks very much for that. And I'm glad that I wasn't having a moment just thinking that that was something. And I completely understand what you're saying about how when you have these fantastic ideas, you find out that someone has written a book in German in 1912 about it. That happened to me quite a few times. I remember when I was at uni and I was coming up with great ideas and then finding very old books written about it. So, no, it's great because on one level you think you've made a real achievement. On the other hand, you get that dashed quite quickly. But going back to the bridge, there is an episode the bridge is associated with that falls out just after the Regal period. And it involves a great name, another great Roman name. And I apologize for my associations. When I read this name is Horatius Cocles.
Yes.
I assume that's, but I read it as when I first read it as Horatius Cockles, and it made me straight away. I was thinking of that he's in Dickens. He feels like he should be a chimney sweeper in Dickens or something. But he performs a heroic act. So what happens is you have the Etruscans who are being led by Lars Porsena, and they're attacking Rome. They take the Janiculum Hill, which I'll speak about in a moment, and then they look to attack Rome and get through the front of it through that bridge. And Horatius is stood on the bridge and he's defending against all of these individuals, and he asks that the bridge is dismantled behind him so they can't make progress. He successfully defeats a few of them and then jumps in the river and swims to the side after being injured a few times.
Excuse me, we have to mention that he was injured in the buttocks.
I didn't want to say anything. Well, actually, I didn't want to say anything about that. Yeah, well, because it links in. When I thought of that, I don't know if you are familiar with the Battle of Stamford Bridge.
Yes, I think I am. Are we talking about something to do with 1066 here?
Yeah, 1066. Yeah. So prior to the Battle of Hastings, you have the Battle of Stamford Bridge, which is up in the north of England, where you have an invading sort of, I won't call it this army, forget the name. Is it Harold Bluetooth?
Harold Hardrada, I think. Yeah, Harold Hardrada.
Yeah. And they're attacked, and you have one individual defending against all of the English, as it were, army on a bridge, and he puts up a heroic performance until someone goes under the bridge and stabs him from underneath it, and presumably in the groin stroke buttock area again. So if just a general thing, if you ever find yourself defending against superior forces on a bridge where everyone's got pointy things, just watch your backside. That's all I'm going to say.
It's very important.
That's a big weakness. Yeah. Just a handy hint there. Do what you will with it, and this became a hugely important thing. And again, to the credit of your book, you write about exemplar. You write about the idea of particular events in Roman history being held up as this is how we do it. This defines us as a culture. This is how Rome saw itself. This is like a defining moment. I think in a way it kind of gets overlooked because that's at the time where you've got the Republic being sort of born. You've got lots of things going on. It's like one of those years where you see what won the Oscar and you think, my God, that won the Oscar. And all these other amazing films didn't win the Oscar. And you think that would have won the Oscar any other year, but you had like 4 of them on year. And in around 509 BC, you have all these big events or some big events going on. They kind of almost, they steal the attention from each other. But Rome was very, very keen on this. It becomes a sort of household thing within Rome. You have later emperors using the imagery to announce how they're taking Rome back to traditional values and how they're going to defend Rome and things like that. So again, it's really important. The bridge is ultimately associated with that because how you define that visually is with a bridge, because otherwise it's just someone stood there with a spear. You have to have something else in the image. Presumably you're going to have his buttocks being stabbed. You're going to
make sure you've got on a strong pair of underpants.
Yeah, no. Well, Yeah, the artist was so limited. You got a coin. I've got a coin. That's all I've got. So it becomes a really defining moment for Rome, and that bridge is part of that. So it became, and it's also when we talk about space, in a way, we have to talk about time. And when you have somewhere like, and I should have mentioned this about Tarpeian Rock and about the bridge, these are both places that Romans can go to and feel and connect with the past, as it were. Now, I'm not saying that we're all kind of doing nice guided tours of Rome, getting in touch with their inner Romans, but at the same time, culturally, you have these points where you can say, this is where this happened. We have that now. We have pretty much, you can go to any city and it will have, this is where so and so lived, or this is where this particular event occurred. And the actual location might look very different to how it did back then, but you can still in theory connect with it. So I think this is very important for Rome in a couple of ways. The only other thing that I could mention about the bridge was, because I'm going to speak about how it linked in with the Janiculum, but the expansion. The bridge allowed Rome to expand past its initial borders. It was that thing which allowed it to get past the Tiber, which was ultimately something that hugely defined it. The hills keep it there, but the Tiber is the thing that really defines Rome, or that's how I perceive it. And you also have again, my pronunciation on this, the Argai, which was a ritual of purification that finished on the bridge where they threw straw dolls into the water as a part of sort of purification of the city. So yeah, the bridge is really, really important. And it's something which doesn't necessarily get underlooked. I think there's a lot of things to consider at Rome. But if you're thinking about Rome, perhaps think about the bridges. Next time you visit Rome, think more about the bridges as a way of going somewhere and just, go and stand on them, have a look around. Think what might have been.
I was going to say, you're not going to have him like bending over showing his butt cheek to everybody.
Yeah.
Disappointing, Rome. You had a choice and you missed it.
Think of what would happen if you weren't wearing steel underwear at that very moment.
Think of what would happen if they were made of wood, and how difficult they would have been to cross. So we've been thinking about the major hills of Rome. We've been thinking about the Tiber River, and we've talked a little bit specifically about the Palatine and the Aventine because they sort of stand out in that sort of foundation moment for Rome. But there's definitely more than two, the fabled seven. And you've mentioned already the Janiculum a little bit. And I'm also wondering maybe about the Caelian Hill as well. And how did these hills start to feature into the regal history as it starts to expand out and we get further into the kings?
Okay, yeah, I mentioned the Janiculum. So the Janiculum is inherently linked to Rome because of that bridge. And it's the other side of the Tiber. The Janiculum, in a sense, is there for one reason, and it's there because you want to get it before anyone else gets it. And again, if you ever played Civilization, you're thinking that big hill that's near my city, I've got to put some units on that because guess what will happen if I don't? And it's justified partly. And I think this is interesting because the other things about the hills is they get much more of a sort of cultural feel to them. With the Janiculum, it's there, and the sources pretty much say it's there because of trade. Because then if you've got that hill, you can govern what goes on the river and the other trade routes, the other side of the Tiber, which apparently could be exposed to banditry, which is very common. It's also defense, because if you've got the hills, someone else can't. And interesting enough, when you've got Horatius, the reason that the advancing Etruscan army are able to do that and take the bridge or try and take the bridge is because they took the Janiculum first. It's the first place they went. So it's really important purely from a strategic point. Other hills tend to be more cultural. The Caelian Hill was settled by Tullus Hostilius from those people that he took from Alba Longa, which is where he devastated it more or less after some thorough betrayal by Metius Ferfetius, who was then torn asunder by horses. And I think it's even Livy says that was wrong.
Yeah, that was not a good time.
You crossed the line.
But what
there.
a name. That's one of my favorite names.
Yeah, well, again, I just think of him as a sort of the Cowardly Lion type character, but he wasn't. He was an ardent politician and a treacherous one at that, which surprised really, because you would have thought you could have gone to the Tarpeian Rock instead. But hey, you got horses. What are you going to do? Now, in terms of it being named, it was named after apparently an Etruscan soldier called Caelius Vibena, or my personal favourite, and I like this more. It could have been named after oak trees.
Mm.
And if you think, why would you name somewhere after oak trees? I did read that the Aventine apparently had an association with the myrtle tree, so that could have been a reason why it took its name. Escaline Hill was apparently named after chestnut trees, or could have been, and the Viminal after willow trees.
Oh, that's a beautiful
So
way to think about Rome. Just
yeah,
the surrounding forest, that's
is.
much more peaceful than other options.
yeah,
I was going to say it sounds uncharacteristically gentle.
I know it did stick out when I was
It
reading it. I
does.
thought that would be nice. I don't believe it, but that would be nice. It's more likely we're going to name this hill after someone we threw from a rock.
Yeah.
We're going to name this hill after someone we cut in half, or it's it doesn't always seem to be the most pleasant way that they find their names, but also considering, just think of how Romans considered their space, and it was dominated by woods, forests, and trees. And obviously, you don't get that so much if you go to Rome now. Obviously, even though you've got some wonderful plane trees, and they do have some lovely shrubbery to use Python. But as a general rule, you forget just how much it would have been dictated by. So far, we've spoken about hills. So far, we've spoken about geographical features, topological features, as it were. But we're also talking about sort of woods, trees, things like that.
And I think this ties in very much to what you've been saying earlier about like that sort of monolithic approach to history and the mistake in doing that. And it's like, this is a place that's just starting out as a place where people have settled and have decided to build a life for themselves. It is immersed in nature. They're surrounded by it. And it's not like when you go to Rome today, and it's obviously a very urban place, and they do have a lot of big and beautiful gardens, but they're very contained. This is much more sprawling wildness. And the thing that is unusual is the fact that there are people living here.
Yeah, yeah. The only other thing that I could really come into when it's talking about the Caelian is something that is I couldn't find a great deal of evidence behind it, but the link to possibly Egeria or Egeria, who was the nymph who advised Numa Pompilius, the second Roman king, and who apparently helped him do many things. There's a sort of shrine apparently, or something near the Porta Capena, which was on the foot of the hill. And if for those that don't know, you can look at Numa in two ways. You can look at him, this kindly old man, or you can look at him as a bit of a traveling salesman. I was thinking of kind of those in those films where you have the sort of preacher from the southern United States, and they're going to cure you, and all of that kind of stuff. And he feels a bit like that at times, mainly because he sorts of does things like he convinces people to come around, look at his place and say, look, I've got nothing to serve anyone for a feast. Come back in a couple hours. Wow, look, I'm magic. There's lots of food. And apparently people in Rome said, well, that must be magic, as opposed to just knowing the good caterer, which is more plausible response. But he was very much linked into this sort of spiritual mythology of Rome. He gave Rome, or furnished Rome, with a set of really religious spaces where they just compete, because he seems to have taken, he didn't want the job as king. He turns up, and then he realizes that you've got this really, really gruesome band of highly undesirable people who are being very violent to each other. Rather than we've got to keep them away from declaring war, so we just give them a space where they can compete without weapons. He does that through setting up all the magistracies, all the priesthoods and stuff like that, so people can now sort of, I suppose, work out how they can graft across that competitive element into the religious element. And so presumably now people just getting annoyed they didn't get the right priesthood, as opposed to running across and chopping someone's head off. So he kind of contains that. So you got to feel from that respect. But apparently he has a nymph who teaches him lots, gives him lots of special advice and information. She was linked in some way to this hill, or has a possible association with this hill.
Numa. He's one of my favorite characters from the Regal period, I have to say. And the fact that he spends what seems to be at least 50% of his time hanging out with an imaginary friend in the forest is just fantastic.
We didn't. With one of the things we won't get the chance to talk about is Jupiter Lycius, or Lycius, the the magical sprats that he had, which would stop him getting hit by lightning, and the fact that he could use an altar to Jupiter to conduct a storm and then read portents from it. I just think that's wonderful. That's just such a fantastic myth that you had him, or rather an association with him. It sort of moves more to the whole Etruscan side of brontoscopy, which is how you read the portents through storms. And I've actually got a copy of the brontoscopic calendar, and I put it up on my TikTok. Whenever it storms, I go out and I read what it portays to. What it, it says weird stuff. Sometimes it's like everyone will die, the crops will be ruined. Sometimes sometimes it's nice. Most of the time it's not. Sometimes it's nice, saying anyone called Clive, they probably need to check their car insurance. It goes from the big to the really, really incidental, because presumably you've got 365 entries. So once you get the big things done, you've got to start picking up.
You just got to fill out the rest of the thing. You're like, okay, all right.
Check if there's thunder heard, check the back of the fridge. Something might be off. It's that sort of a thing.
Oh dear. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with us and taking us through some of these sort of sprawling landscapes that make up this early period of Rome's sort of topography, the way it thinks about itself, and the way people might be engaging with those sort of spaces. I think it's really great food for thought to start to reimagine what this place looked like, how it operated, and how people operated within those spaces. And obviously the modern city today inspires your imagination for some of those sorts of things. But when we're thinking about the Regal period, we're going back well before all of those ruined pieces of architecture that you spot in the Forum, for instance. So it's like we really have to get ourselves into a whole different zone to start thinking about the Regal period. So thank you so much.
No, pleasure. Thank you very much for letting me come on, give you weird analogies, jokes that probably didn't do well, and tangents, which is generally what I do in my life.
I'm always up for a good shrubbery reference,
Yes, and I think that you have showcased to our audience, if they aren't already avid listeners of your podcast, that in spite of the fact that you keep calling us experts, your level of research is amazing, and people should definitely go and check out your wonderful work.
That's very kind of you. You're not expecting money for that, are you? I have no budget. I can't.
Well, naturally, I don't want to have to pay you for plugging our book earlier, so. Obviously,
yeah. Well, thank you very much, and I really appreciate being on a podcast such as yourselves, which is obviously very, very held very well in high esteem.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Partial Historians. A huge thank you to our Patreon supporters for helping make this show spectacular. If you enjoyed the show, there's a few ways that you can show your support. You can write a review wherever you listen in to help spread the word. Reviews really make our day and help new people find our podcast. Researching and producing a podcast takes time. If you're keen to chip in, you can buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi or join our fantastic Patreons for early releases and exclusive content. You can find our show notes as well as links to our merch and where to buy our book, Rex, The 7 Kings of Rome, at partialhistorians.com. Until next time, we are yours in ancient Rome.